Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 12 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on Australian-based cybersecurity news. I'm Richard Granger, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Caleb Boyd, DFIR analyst in the DFIR team here at Driscoll Labs. Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you. It's good to be here. First one for the year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're back. We're reinvigorated and re-energized after the Christmas break. Even though most of us were working over that period. But yes, so we're here today. We've got a couple of interesting topics to discuss. Did you want to give us a little bit of an overview, Caleb, of what we'll be chatting about?
Definitely. There's quite a bit coming up. Hopefully we won't have as busy of a year in the cyber space, but looking at what's going to happen, it probably will be quite a busy year. We've got quite a few things that we're going to be discussing. The first one is LockBit. That was quite a bit on the news last year. LockBit 4.0 has been announced / teased by LockBit. Coveware has also released an article that's quite interesting around ransomware payment statistics in Australia. And we're going to be talking about a cyber attack on Japan Airlines during the holiday season. And a really important one also is around business email compromises. We're going to be talking about MailSync and malicious OAuth applications. And then, of course, our vulnerability of the month is Ivanti vulnerabilities, unfortunately, which we'll be discussing a little bit later.
Yes, hot off the press, that one as well.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we've got a lot to chat about. Why don't you kick us off by LockBit 4, the teaser? What's the go with that one?
Yeah, this one came up quite an interesting way. So in the DFIR team, we have a ransomware feed where we will see recently posted ransom victims, and a listing came up that was called LockBit 4.0, and it was actually announced through LockBit themselves. So what do? We hopped on the LockBit site, and just as if a company themselves would be posted on the LockBit site, there was a posting called LockBit 4.0, and it was basically teasing that they are continuing the operations and announcing a new version. This is a particularly interesting around everything that happened last year around LockBit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting to see if they will continue in the next year.
Yeah. Have you sort of, I guess, some background as well for people tuning in. So we, as in Australia, have sanctioned the lead developer, or LockBit SUP, the head of LockBit, which has kind of really impacted organizations that find themselves in a position where they need to pay a ransom to be able to decrypt files. Most of the time that's because they don't have backups that they're able to recover from, or the backups have been impacted as well. Have you heard sort of anything about how other countries are sort of been impacted by any sanctions as well?
Yeah, I think it's quite widespread. Obviously, when that was announced around LockBit support, and obviously the leader being Dimitri, I think a lot of countries were pretty quick to place him on the sanctions list. But Australia's taken a really strong stance, and I guess the next article we'll talk about, the impact that's had, and in our opinion, probably a positive impact to ransom payments.
Yeah, I think it's sort of interesting that I guess they're kind of doubling down with LockBit, the brand, with sort of the release of LockBit 4. Obviously, we've had LockBit, LockBit 2, LockBit 3, and now LockBit 4. Whereas I suppose one potential avenue they could have gone is sort of rebranding a completely different ransomware group and try and avoid some of the sanctions that are going to prevent them from being paid by Australia, at least. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Definitely. And I guess the thing with it is we've seen quite a big uptake in other groups and ransomware attacks against Australian organizations, right, from other groups. And probably the suspicion and the correlation that you could cause from that is LockBit had a huge amount of affiliates, and these affiliates have started to move across to other groups. Now, the question is really, will those affiliates start to go back to LockBit with this announcement, or is it really just a play and trying to keep the name living long?
Yeah, I suppose it's probably a mixture of both, right? LockBit trying to, obviously with a lot of the affiliates jumping ship to other groups, trying to revamp and try and get some of those affiliates back in there. Definitely an interesting space. When's that? Have they got a timer for when that's going to be released?
They do have a timer. Yeah, it's
Okay.
surprisingly. Yeah, usually for the background, the timer is for victim organizations, and that's leading towards when that data set that's been stolen from the environment is published to the community. Yeah, there's a timer for this one, which is quite surprising. It's quite a lengthy timer, so I think it's more of a fake timer, if you could call it that. And it actually directs people to go towards another link, which is obviously owned by LockBit, and it's guiding them towards the affiliate sign-up process. And it actually encourages, if you are going to go through an affiliate, you have to pay a sum of money in the form of a cryptocurrency, and then I'm assuming you get access to their affiliate program.
What have we got next to chat about? What's the next topic?
Yeah, so it streamlines right off of ransom payments. So we're talking about Coveware, and Coveware released a really interesting article towards the end of last year, and it's around ransomware payment statistics. In terms of background, Coveware we work with quite extensively. They probably one of the leading, if not the leading, ransomware negotiation vendors, and they do a lot of negotiations around Australian victims that are experiencing ransomware incidents. So they've obviously got a lot of statistics, and they have a really good picture of what's happening in Australia, and particularly ransomware payments. Why they made this article is a Australian Financial Review article claimed a significant high amount of payments were paid in the last year, and it doesn't really correlate with what Coveware's seen firsthand. So I guess the real thing around this article is Coveware saying, hey, these statistics don't really match up with what we've seen, and we're the ones that are really facilitating these negotiations. So there's probably a little bit of due diligence that's coming around the statistics, and are these statistics that we're seeing around high ransom payments actually factual or not?
Yeah, I did see this when it came out. I think it was sort of mid-December or so, just before the Christmas break, when Coveware released it. And yeah, I think it's a very well-written article, and it provides a lot of, I guess, facts around what they've been observing compared to sort of the AFR one, which was sort of just, saying that this is what it is. And
yeah,
I think what's sort of interesting as well is in the Coveware article, I can't remember the exact amount, but I think they said like 13% of ransoms were being paid, right? It was a very, very low number, which that actually correlates with our statistics as well for organizations or victim organizations that paid the ransom during the financial year 2023 to 24 of around, I think it was 13% as well. So it correlates. Obviously, Coveware have a much larger volume of matters to reflect on and gather this information from, but it was quite interesting that it sort of aligned with what we're sort of seeing in our responses as well.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the call-outs in the article is really, it was a good news story saying, the sanctions that the Australian government has put in place has actually done a really positive effect, and a ransom payment really should not be occurring, and it should be the last resort that's actually happening. What other avenues can we navigate when a ransomware incident has happened?
Yeah, and I think that's probably, as you mentioned, a good news story as well, because we are seeing less payments by victim organizations, which obviously further funds this activity by the groups. And I guess, and what we're seeing particularly as well is organizations are generally only really paying for when they have no choice. So the backups have been impacted. So a lot of the organizations we work with have, good backup systems in place, which allows them to recover from these attacks in a relatively quick time period as well. So I think that's good. It's showing a bit more maturity. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it's good. I guess the stories are getting out there maybe of ransomware victims and how important backups are. In terms of another attack that we've seen is DDoS. There was a cyber attack against Japan Airlines, and it wasn't a ransomware attack, it was a DDoS attack, and it caused quite a bit of devastation during the holiday period. So obviously an airline, and everyone's trying to move around around the holiday season. It's not a good recipe.
It's a perfect time for this to happen, right?
Definitely. Yeah, they've really timed it well. But it just goes to show, right? Holiday time, it's really important that you do have those plans and processes in place. We kind of preached on it before the break, and having those contacts, who do you contact if something does happen? And when you're on a skeleton staff, can that skeleton staff manage if an incident does happen? Probably not, right? You're going to have to reach out to some other third parties.
And it's I suppose it's quite interesting, because obviously you could say that airline organizations are critical infrastructure, and I guess that I obviously, without sort of knowing their systems and how everything's set up, but it's kind of surprising that they could be sort of hit by a DDoS attack. We don't see them very often, do we, in our response? But what if we do come across it? What are sort of the steps that we recommend organizations take?
Yeah, definitely. I guess having that web application firewall is very important, especially when you're hosting critical websites or any applications, right? And having a plan, right? What are you going to do if you are experiencing those high periods? What other actions can you take when you're experiencing those high request periods? And really thinking out about building out some incident response playbooks. That's really important, and getting some guidance around what your applications are specifically.
Yeah. And did they report on how many, what the impact was over that period?
It was quite extensive. I think they were up pretty quickly after, but I think it was something like 24 domestic flights, according to the article. So it was quite extensive, but yeah, anything with airlines, right? You delay, and people are moving for pretty important reasons around the holiday season.
Yeah, a lot of travel, people sort of going home and going to see family and friends and things like that.
I was recently coming down to Melbourne, and they had to get the old paper out and do the whole flight manifest and tick in boxes. So you could just imagine, right, doing that for 24 domestic flights, according to the article.
I mean, travel in general is pretty bad enough without having to worry about a DDoS attack taking down the systems and resorting to paper, because you've always got delays for some reason or another. Well, that's what I find anyway.
We're covering all the bases of incidents. So our next article is actually from ourselves in the DFIR team. So we've gone from ransomwares to DDoS attacks, and now we're going to business email compromises. So this is a very important topic, especially for small, medium, all the way up to enterprise businesses. And it's coming in quite common nowadays, and it's quite unfortunate. So usually the business email compromise playbook that threat actors will follow is they are financially motivated, they're seeking to intercept funds, and they will alter bank accounts on invoices, and they try to get those payments to their bank accounts that they own. Unfortunately, that's sometimes not possible for them, and then they will send out phishing campaigns. So that's usually the cycle of a business email compromise attack. But then there's a second part of a business email compromise, and that's the data obligations, especially around what data is in those mailboxes. So you're starting to question around, I've worked at this company for 15 years. What type of data do you have in that mailbox? Do you have driver's licenses? Do you have tax file numbers? There's probably quite a bit of sensitive data in your mailbox. And when a threat actor unfortunately does get access to these mailboxes, we find they are collecting a large amount, if not the full mailbox, using enterprise applications, malicious enterprise applications. So namely EM clients and perfect data. I'm sure
see those a lot.
Very, very common. And both those applications provide the ability for a full mailbox backup, unfortunately. And that could be quite an impact on the legal side of things, right?
Yeah, because you're right. If we do find evidence of these applications being used in mailbox synchronization, that can really increase the scope of what needs to be analyzed to really get that perspective on whether this is a notifiable data breach, what kind of information is in there. You mentioned before, we see sort of driver's license, passports, all that kind of stuff as well. We work with a lot of healthcare organizations as well, where they've said we really, really, really try and get patients to not email through information to the reception mailbox, but they keep on doing it, and obviously that can have some impact on private health information as well if that's contained within a mailbox. So it can really increase the scope of the legal advice and legal work that needs to be completed to get an understanding of what the impact is on the data that's contained within that mailbox.
Definitely. It also highlights like our role in the investigation, right? As third-party forensics, we come in with a completely unbiased opinion, and that's kind of where our value comes in. We're dealing with these types of incidents day in and out, and we're understanding what the threat actors are doing quite regularly. So we can provide that third-party assessment. But also sometimes we come into an investigation where perhaps a internal IT team or even sometimes an IT service provider has provided assurance to clients, and we go in and say, hey, unfortunately, it's not that case. Unfortunately, there's been your whole mailbox is in the presence of the threat actor, and they have a copy of it and they could do what they want. So quite unfortunate.
Yeah, that definitely highlights the purpose and the reason why organizations like our DFIR team are brought in to assist with these, because we know what we're looking for. We've done hundreds of these investigations before. We're very skilled at being able to quickly identify what logs are available, parsing them, analyzing them, and providing a very sort of quick picture about what's happened and whether there is a requirement for discovery if there's been mailbox synchronization, things like that. And that's just because that's what we've been trained on. That's what we do every day. Whereas your internal IT, they might have a bit of security knowledge, but they might not be sort of well versed in the importance of some of these logs and how you can interpret them and what they mean and what the impact of that could be for the outcome of the investigation.
Yeah. EM Client, for example, it is just an alternative to Outlook Desktop, right? It looks the exact same almost. It allows you to send emails and just has this little hidden feature that they use to download full mailboxes, right? So it's so easy to miss unless you're doing it day in and out.
Yeah, whereas we see EM Client perfect data all the time. So as soon as we see that, we know it's not great what's happened here.
Definitely. Yeah, it's quite scary the extent that it can go to.
In terms of organizations preparing, I guess, for these kind of investigations, and are there any sort of top tips that you would recommend for organizations that have sort of Microsoft 365 for their email about how they can best sort of defend against this and how they can best ensure that logging is enabled and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I'll take a couple steps back. The thing that we used to harp on about a couple of years ago is MFA. And MFA used to be sold as a silver bullet. Unfortunately, threat actors can bypass MFA, and it's not the only control that can stop these. So there's lots of other controls that we can start to leverage on. And so, there's heaps of different things that we can talk about in terms of controls. The first thing specifically around these third-party applications is you can actually restrict the ability for users to be able to add these applications. So just turn that off. It should be off by default. Users should be able to add a third-party application without approval. So that's first one. The second one is your conditional access policies. Really important to make sure that you're making sure that your conditional access policies are to ensure only the users that are allowed to access resources are there to access them. So things like lock-in authentications outside of Australia. If you only do business within Australia, there's no point needing someone to access resources outside of Australia. There's lots of ways around that, especially around traveling users. And there's a couple of other conditional access policies, such as blocking legacy authentication. You can go all the way to ensuring a user can only access your cloud applications with a corporate-owned device. So that's a really good recommendation as well. Obviously, that's going the full mile. But coming back to the root of business email compromises, they're financially motivated. So we can take a step back from the technical controls and we can look at, payment processes and procedures, your accounts department saying, hey, if you get a request to change bank details, you should probably give them a ring with the phone number that you've actually got off of their website, or you've got an existing contact there. And another thing that's really important that we've seen organizations do is add in a statement into the signatures of their accounts department and saying, hey, we will never change our bank details over email. We will contact you by phone call, or we'll contact you by in person to let you know those details.
And those sort of non-technical controls that you mentioned are very important. And we've seen it on numerous investigations where that was the difference between the organization losing, hundreds of thousands of dollars in payment redirection fraud to not losing it. The technical controls had failed from what they had in their environment, and they were able to stop it from happening by having these non-technical controls in there, by someone picking up the phone, calling the person and saying, hey, did you actually want to change your bank account details? What's going on here? And they're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And then that's how it's been identified that there's been a unauthorized access. So having both technical and these non-technical controls in place are really important steps for organizations. Yeah,
much better your accounts department saying, hey, we got this dodgy bank change request versus a customer coming to you and saying, hey, we paid it to the wrong account details. And then that kicks off your investigation. Which one would you choose, right?
Yeah.
In terms of vulnerabilities, right? We move into vulnerability of the fortnight. Wasn't expecting too much in this early of the year, but Ivanti has started it again this year, unfortunately, and we're looking at a number of critical vulnerabilities.
Yes. So Ivanti, a fairly well-known vendor, I'd say. They have a lot of sort of network perimeter applications and systems and things like that. Do you want to run us through what this particular one is? To start off the year with a bang.
So I think the main thing that we're looking at is what's the impact, and a attacker that is able to execute this vulnerability and exploit it, we're looking at them able to achieve remote code execution. And that's the worst that you can really look at. If they're able to execute code on your appliance, they can then get a foothold into your environment. So pretty worrying and concerning. And I think the thing from their article that was even more concerning is they did mention that it is exploited and they have detected exploitation of it. So that does push us down. You need to start to do these threat hunts and confirm, have we been attempted to be exploited by this vulnerability? Has it been successful, or have we not? So there's a couple of things you can look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw that CISA had added this to their KEV, or known exploited vulnerabilities list, on the 8th of January. On the 9th, Mandiant issued an advisory as well, saying that they've observed zero-day exploitation of this as well. So it's definitely something that is being utilized by threat actors. And as you mentioned, Caleb, so obviously organizations, if you are using these particular products, so Ivanti Connect Secure and Ivanti Neurons for ZTA gateways, checking to see what versions you're running. So Ivanti do have a integrity checker tool, which can let you know if you are running these vulnerable versions of the software. And then if you are patching, getting them up to date is really important. And as you mentioned as well, threat hunting. So, checking to see if it has been exploited prior to you putting the patch on there, because let's say that a web shell's been placed on one of these perimeter devices, the patch is not going to remove that web shell. That's still going to remain there, and that's still going to allow the threat actor to interact with the system even after a patch has been applied to it. So it's really important that organizations are doing these activities. We've had an incident last year, Caleb, if you remember, for the printer software. I can't remember off the top of my head, but the IT provider for the organization did identify that there was exploitation of it, and they did a couple of checks and things like that on that server. And then a couple months later, the organization got ransomware, and sort of when we came in, we identified that they had already moved laterally within the environment and put persistence on various systems, including a domain controller and a backup server, prior to the patching and the sort of investigation done by the MSP. So it's really important that you are doing these things if you've determined that the software has been vulnerable, to make sure that you're sort of covering all your bases.
Yeah, definitely. Really important. I guess that incident really highlights it, right? A couple months later, they didn't even know. They thought they have done the right thing. They patched. What's the worst that could happen? And the threat actor returned, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, kind of sort of covered a lot there. I think the last sort of thing that we'd touch on is sort of SOC and DFIR activity over the last sort of couple of weeks. Obviously, we're very well represented by the DFIR team, and Brad's on leave at the moment. So anything in particular that sort of comes to mind for the last few weeks in the DFIR space?
Yeah, it's interesting around trends, right? Like last year, we were chaotically busy, especially around the Christmas period. This year, we were busy, but not as busy. And I guess it does just show around incidents. And you can't predict when an incident's going to happen, let alone when we're going to get an influx of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we as you mentioned, last year was very, very busy. We had numerous sort of incidents kick off right before Christmas. This year we had a couple. One was the Sunday before Christmas, I think. So again, sort of shows that these can happen anytime. So making sure that you're prepared in your response is very important. I think the only other real takeaway is that over the last few weeks, and we're probably going to sound like broken records, but in terms of what we're seeing for initial access, it's the same thing. We're seeing SSL VPNs without MFA, seeing a lot of remote desktop gateways that are published to the internet with no MFA configured. And it's just sort of easy targets for threat actors to try and get that initial foothold.
Definitely. Very unfortunate, right?
Yep. Okay. Anything else you wanted to cover off, Khaled, before we wrap up episode 12?
No, I think we've covered the whole full yards. Ransomware across to BECs, so it's really good.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining me today, and just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.